This presentation provides practical advice for editing your resume. Imagine that you are hoping to serve as the director of events for a team of 20 people. In your most recent role, you supervised 5 people, and the new role would be a step up. But you think you're ready. You pull out your resume, which is entirely fictitious for purposes of this example, and here's what you have. This presentation will walk you through this resume from the perspective of the reviewer. And as the reviewer, I noticed several things right off the top. There's too much detail in the address and skills section. The email address, swimfan, is just too casual. And this person is in Ohio. Do they really want to move to Charlottesville, where this job is based? Although I'm glad to see this candidate has many years of postgraduate experience, do I really care about their undergraduate major? It's front and center in this resume, but this real estate is too prime to share here. There's also a lack of attention to detail that I noticed right away. The title of the job is bold, and then not bold. Also, the dates worked appear before the job duty, and I'd really like to see that reversed. The second page of the resume tells me that the candidate spent about 2 years at World Strides, but hasn't been there in more than 7. And yet, 11 lines of the resume are dedicated to this job. Why is that? Unless these program coordinator duties are the most important prior duties to highlight for this next job, this is all out of proportion. I'll suggest 3 to 4 lines max to discuss this role. We also see that Target appears from 1992. This is something we're going to need to address. Here's a pro tip. Writing your resume is a lot like staging your house for sale. If you've ever tried to do this, you know that there are many things in your home and your experience that are near and dear to you. Sometimes you've looked at them for so long that you don't even notice them anymore. Tailoring your resume to a particular job is a lot like staging your house for sale. But you have the advantage here because you've read the job description carefully. You know who your buyer is, and you know what they say they're looking for. That's the information to include, highlight, and develop. Stage the resume in a way that makes your best qualities stand out, and give yourself permission to let some of the other details go. In terms of the big picture, our initial resume could benefit from some reorganization that puts critical details in the first half of page 1 and brings the resume, if possible, down to 1 page. We know we can save space in the address section. You will likely be notified that you'll be interviewed by either phone or email. So provide just one option for each. And especially if you're relocating but not yet arrived in the city where you're applying, you may want to consider dropping the city and state. For the resume, if you have many years of work experience, it's usually best to lead with experience and let your education follow. Finally, the eye is drawn to the left-hand side of the page. Your job title and not the date belongs here. Now we're going to simplify the content. Look for places where you can make a bigger impact in your resume with fewer words. Think about the job you want. What skills does this new job require? What portions of your experience would you draw from to meet these new demands? This is the material you want to highlight. On the second pass through the revisions of this resume, I'm going to tackle the summary. And I noticed several things right off the bat. This candidate is trying to tell instead of show, with language like, I'm sophisticated. There's some red flags that inadvertently appear, such as the references to navigating difficult personalities and being a perfectionist. We can bring 5 lines of text down to 2 and still pack a bigger punch. We know that the project manager who delivered on time and within budget achieved the outcome we want. They are a problem solver, which suggests they know how to get things done. And given the high-profile nature of the projects, this candidate probably has good people skills. I know I'm reading that into the blurb, but that's the type of inferences that you'd like people to make. You don't want the reviewer wondering whether the candidate was one among several difficult personalities in her last job, which is what the original wording might suggest. In terms of the director of events position, there's lots of repetition and extraneous words. Let's simplify. I organized, planned, coordinated, and managed events is moved to the present tense, as she's still in this role. These duties are recast simply as plan, manage, and execute. It says the same thing, but gets quickly to the point. In terms of the CFA Institute position, I see two critical errors here. The first is this focus on creating charts, which this candidate most certainly needed to do. But is this what you aspire to do in your next role? Or can this be recast to show the big picture? Secondly, we see a reference to terrific attention to detail, which is always scary to see when the resume is riddled with typos, or like in this case, inconsistencies, but the date sometimes is bold and other times not bold. In terms of the revision, created charts is recast as developed interactive tracking system, a far more compelling skill to highlight for a director-level role. On page 2 for World Strides, here we have lots of real estate dedicated to a relatively old job. Look closely at the first sentence. Isn't that enough for the resume? You can always expound upon particularly relevant details in an interview, but for now, let's keep this one simple. For the UVA Alumni Foundation, your contacts there could still be useful to you, but the substance of this work likely isn't. Let's cut it down. Here, the job title is self-explanatory. Why is Target still here? It was a managerial role, but it was so long ago. This candidate would be better served highlighting supervisory skills in the position held on page 1 of this resume. The resume does need to be truthful, but that doesn't mean you need to include every role, especially from this long ago. In terms of education, the years don't matter much now. This candidate clearly has many years of work experience, and they can delete the years, and we can save some additional space here. Finally, there's everything but the kitchen sink in certificates and special skills. Say it briefly, figure out what to leave off, and provide an appropriate level of detail. Here, the fact that the technology skills include Windows 7 and a very old version of PowerPoint, which is actually misspelled, detracts from this section. Subheadings in more strategic language will help clean this up. Let's do a final walkthrough. We know we've left a lot of material on the cutting room floor, but we may still have work to do. Are we close to one page? And if so, can we get there? In the last pass of the resume, I'm going to think about whether the months really matter. Here they don't add much, and maybe we can let them go. The CFA Institute position has more space than the current role. Proportionately, I'd like to see more detail on the more senior role. We also have this reference to ensured customer satisfaction. Maybe the resume isn't the best place to highlight this. We could save it for the cover letter. And then in terms of the Alumni Foundation, is this entry really adding value? Now that we can see the whole, we can consider this a little bit more carefully. Maybe it depends upon where it appears. If eliminating this reference would add a big gap in the middle of a work history, I might keep it. But in this case, it was a very early and junior career job. I think we can drop it. And we're still a little short on space. So let's see how a few additional modifications might be able to help. Here's the final draft. We've done it. The resume is on one page. It's well organized and it hits the high points. It's customized to the position that this candidate wants to apply to. The certificates and skills section is streamlined and the key categories stand out. With the resume complete, you likely have another type of writing opportunity, your cover letter. This will allow you to provide context for your work history and bring your interest in this new position of interest to life.